Hello students, before we are going to make the DFD itself, we are first going to rehab the uses of symbols for the DFD. The first symbol is the blue circle in the top left. This indicates a process. It has to be a verb and it has to have a number. It has to have minimal one input and one output, and they cannot be the same. Secondly, we have the data flow. The data flow is the are nouns which indicate what goes from one process to another, or from the process to a data store. When it goes from a process to a data store, then it doesn't have to be named. When you see here, register order is the process, and there goes an arrow to orders, the data store orders. Here no name is needed because you already know what the arrow indicates. It's the order. The third symbol is for the data store. The data store is a temporary or permanent moment when data is stored. So for example, here, register order, then it goes to the data store orders, because the data in here is needed in a later step of the process for controlling the stock. It has to be a unique noun, which is clearly specifying what is saved in the data store. The last symbol used in a DFD is the external or the terminator. This shows the environment of the system. It's always a trigger or a receiver of the data. So in this case, on the bottom, the customer sends an order to our company. The order is the trigger for the process to start. So this is a trigger. But the same customer is also a receiver of data. In this case, the order confirmation it gets back from the company in which it placed an order. The external or the terminator is always outside the system, and it has no relation, is drawn in the DFD with the external. In this last part of the example, the order settlement is the external. So the external or terminator can also be another process, but which is not shown in the DFD itself. So now we will start translating a process description into a DFD, a data flow diagram. Please take some time, pause the video to read the process description. Okay, so that's done now. Now what we are going to do is look at the text from a DFD perspective. First thing we want to do is find the externals or the terminators. This one. This way we can easily find the boundaries of the system. When we read through the text, the first thing we see is the customer. So I will mark that 3. The customer is an external because it's not part of the system. When we read further, here again the customer. When we read this sentence, specialist of the hardware supplier, then you might think it's an external, but the specialist is working for the hardware supplier, and the hardware supplier is the system, and especially the help desk part. So this is not an external. Here again the customer, and here in the almost last sentence, we see the problem is directed to the hardware manufacturer. Since this is about only the hardware supplier, the hardware manufacturer is also an external. Monthly, an overview of problem will be reported to the management. The management is part of the hardware supplier, but since this is only about the help desk, so the help desk is the system on which the DFD focuses, management is an external process. So this is also an external or terminator. As we have seen in the first part of this video, an external or terminator is always sending or receiving data from the system in the DFD. So in this case, the customer can report a problem to the help desk. So it sends information to the system. I will mark this yellow. Here the customer will receive an acknowledgement of receipt. So that is something the customer receives. The customer will get a notification if the problem is solved. So the notification is again what the customer receives. If the specialist in the hardware supplier cannot solve the problem is directed to the hardware manufacturer. So the hardware manufacturer receives the problem. And last, what the management receives is an overview of problems. So now we have both the terminators and the things that connect the system to the terminators. This enables us to make up a context diagram. So now we will turn to a Microsoft Visio. That's a program I am using for making the context diagram. You're free to use whatever program you want, but make sure you use the right symbols in your diagram. So first I'm going to add a help desk system. I'll make it bigger so it's easily readable. I will name it help desk system. The next step is to add the externals, which we highlighted in the process description with the Greek color. We use rectangular shapes for this, and we will name it customer, or just customer. And I'll make it a green color so you see the link with the text here. The other external was I will just copy this. The other one was the hardware manufacturer. And what we've got left is the management, which is also an external. So now we want to add the data flows, which we see here. So the arrows with the names which link the external to the system. We highlighted it in the text as yellow. So what the customer sends to the system is, and then I need to add a connector, is a problem. So then you will name it with a noun. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can read it. And the customer also receives something. So we copy the arrow. We can turn it the other way around from the system to the customer. And what it receives is an acknowledgement of receipt. If the help desk cannot solve the problem, it will send the problem through to the hardware manufacturer. So we will make another arrow here. I'll just copy another one. It goes from the help desk to the hardware manufacturer because the help desk sends, what does it send? The problem to the hardware manufacturer. So we will call it unsolved problem. And then the last piece is the management here on the right. That will receive an overview of problems from the system. So another arrow here. And we will name it overview of problems. So if we check, we see that the customer is highlighted 3 times and only has 2 data flows here. So we see that the notification for when the problem is solved is still missing. So we will add another arrow pointing to customer. And we will call it notification solution. The solution is found. So what we have here is the complete context diagram based on this piece of process description, which we highlighted to get the externals, the data flows, and we visualized it here in the context diagram. So after we've made a context diagram, we are going to make level 1 of the DFD. For this, we are going to copy all the context diagram and add a new tab and then just paste the diagram in here, because what we are going to do is detailing the help desk system. So let's organize this. So all the externals stay the same, but we are going to take a deeper look at what process the actual help desk system is. This will be the starting point of your DFD. What we now need is the process circles, which we have seen before, these blue circles, to visualize all the different process steps in the help desk system. So we add a blue dot, we'll color it blue. What we also need is symbols for the data stores. So you can find it by searching for shapes and data. Let's make it a little bigger. So these are the symbols we are going to add to the context diagram. The next thing we will do is go back to the text, the process description, and find out what processes occur during the help desk system. So first thing what happens is the customer reports a problem, but we already have got that in our DFD. So the next process step is the problem will be registered. As you can see, registered, it is a verb, and most verbs are a process step, which is can be seen in the DFD. Next verb is the customer will receive, so again something that happens. Again a verb. Will investigate is the next, and so you just mark all the actions which are in the text. Solve the problem is another one. Will get a notification is one, and then if the specialist supplier cannot, just direct it to. That's again the next step, and this is also an action, will be reported. Now we have marked all the processes. We can start adding them to the DFD. So the first process step is let's take a look at the text. Register problem is the first one. And let's just put them all side by side. Make sure when you make those process steps that one, it contains a number, and two, it is a verb which is in the circle. The second action process step is send an acknowledgement. When you look at the text, it says the customer will receive an acknowledgement of receipt, but since we are the hardware supplier and this is a DFD about the help desk system of that hardware supplier, we have to send it. The third step is investigate the problem. The fourth is solve the problem. The fifth step is send notification. We'll output it on screen. The sixth step is direct problem to manufacturer. And then we have a seventh process step. So we'll give that number 7. And that is generate a report. Now it all looks a little bit messy, so just make it a little bit bigger. And then arrange some things. Make some space. You can always do that in Visio just by drag and dropping all the different parts. You can also do this afterwards, but to have a little bit of overview, you can better arrange something. And then we are going to connect all the data flows with the processes, which we had already in our context diagram. So the customer comes with a problem, and first thing that happens is the problem gets registered. So we link that to that balloon, to that circle. Notification solution comes from send notification. So we connect that to that. Now if we move this around, the arrow will follow. The acknowledgement of receipt, that comes from send acknowledgement, of course. So we connect that. Unsolvable problem, that comes from direct to manufacturer. And overview of problems comes from generate a report. So I just arranged the circles a little bit. The next thing we are going to do is add the data stores in the DFD. As you can see in the text, for example here, the problem will be registered using available customer information and equipment information. So there has to be a store somewhere, data store, which says customer information. And that has a input for the register problem. There will be another data store called equipment information. And that will also have a input for after the process register problem, an acknowledgement has to be sent. So there has to be a link between the two, and we will call it register problem. So it has to be a noun again. And we'll make it a little bigger. And then another data store needs to be added. I'll put it here. Called problems. And the problem which is registered will also be saved in the problems data store. The information about the problem will afterwards be used in step 3, investigate the problem, and we'll also use the equipment information, and it will have a link to the next step, solve the problem. So this needs to be named, investigated problem, This is one way the problem can go after investigation, but it can also be that that we cannot make the solved problem, and then it will be directed to the manufacturer, hardware manufacturer, and then we will name it unsolved problem. And we also need to add some lines to the data stores, because when the problem is solved, the customer has a solved problem, of course, so that needs to be updated, and the problems, the open problems, are also needed to be updated, because the problem which was first open is now solved, so it can be erased or have different status. And there needs to be another arrow going to the next step, because a notification has to be sent to the customer. So we will call it solved problem. That way the customer can have an update about his problem status and receive a notification of it. The last line which is missing in the data flow is the line from problems to generate a report. The report is about the monthly problems, so it needs to get the data from that data store, otherwise it cannot generate a report at all. So this is basically your data flow diagram, level 1. To make it easier readable, you can always change the layout of the DFD to make it better readable. And this is basically your DFD. In the next step we will take a look at how to see if your DFD is correct or not. The last thing we are going to do with the DFD is checking if the DFD is made in the right way. For that we can use this little checklist. The first thing we need to check is if the names are correct. So are all the processes, the blue dots, are those all verbs? And are all flows between processes named, and are those all nouns? And also the data stores have to have a noun as a name, and it needs to be clear what is stored in that data store. Also the externals have to be nouns. So after checking that, we can make this green. Go to the next checkpoint. Process numbering. Are all processes numbered? If so, then it's alright. Input and output of the processes. Do all processes have a minimum of one input and one output? Now this one has an input and an output. At least one. Here it has more inputs, and here it has only one input and one output. But you can check it for every process, or one input at least, or more, and one output. so that's alright as well. Another checkpoint is if there's no flows between externals and data stores. So these green boxes cannot be linked to those three data stores, which is in this case correct. Also, no flows from data stores to other data stores can be assigned. This is also the case here. This has only got input from there and output from here, output from there and there, but no links are made between the data stores. So that's also green. And the last point is if all levels of the VFD are consistent with each other. So if we go to the other page where we can see the context diagram, all the data flows and the externals need to be the same. So we have the same here, 2 going into the customer, 1 coming out, and the manufacturer, as we can see on the other tab, also an input, and the management also 1 input, and they're all the same on 2 different levels. So a small recap. What we did was first making a context diagram, then making the DFD, and then checking it with the checklist according to Jordan. And now we know our DFD is made in the correct way.